The laugh echoed longer than it should have. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just sharp enough to sting. My brother leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, lips curled like he'd just watched a child pretend to be an adult. Everyone else in the room followed his lead. Smiles. Side glances. That silent agreement that yes, this was funny. All that money, he said, shaking his head. And you couldn't even afford a real office? I felt my face burn, but I didn't look down. I kept my hands folded in my lap, nails pressing into my skin, because I knew if I opened my mouth too fast, my voice would betray me. I had just told them I'd rented a desk. Not an office. Not a suite. A single desk, in a shared workspace downtown. My brother laughed again, shorter this time. Mina. A desk, he repeated, tasting the word. What are you, a college intern? Someone snorted. Someone else cleared their throat like they wanted to stop it, but didn't have the courage. My mother stared at the table, pretending the wood grain was fascinating. My sister avoided my eyes altogether. And me. I smiled. That was the part that confused him. Because what I didn't say, what none of them knew, was that the desk wasn't the beginning. It was the cover. And as my brother laughed, I thought the same thing I'd been thinking for months. They didn't know what I had already done. But back then, 5 years ago, all they saw was the desk. The co-working space smelled like burnt coffee and ambition. That's the only way I can describe it. Rows of mismatched desks, cheap rolling chairs, exposed brick walls meant to feel creative, but mostly just cold. People typing furiously, whispering into headsets, pretending they weren't listening to everyone else's conversations. Desk 47 was mine. Second row from the window. Slight wobble in the left leg. A faint scratch along the surface, like someone had tried to carve their name and failed. I ran my hand across it slowly, feeling the grain, the tiny imperfections. This was where I'd start. Not because it was all I could afford, though that's what my brother believed, but because it was all I needed. I sat down, opened my laptop, and breathed. No applause. No validation. No one clapping me on the back saying, "You're doing great." Just the quiet hum of HVAC and the low murmur of other people chasing dreams that might never pay rent. And for the first time in a long time, I felt calm. Because humiliation is lighter when you're prepared for it. And I had been preparing longer than anyone realized. My brother Mark had always been like this. The golden child. The loud one. The one who spoke before thinking, and never paid the price. He worked in commercial real estate. Had since his 20s. Big deals. Bigger ego. The kind of man who measured success by square footage and how quickly people returned his calls. He owned a house with vaulted ceilings and a refrigerator that talked to him. I owned a laptop and a desk with a bad leg. So in his mind, the hierarchy was obvious. "Let me know when you upgrade," he'd said as the family dinner wrapped up, clapping a hand on my shoulder a little too hard. "Maybe I can help you find a real place." I thanked him. That part still surprises people when I tell them. I didn't argue. Didn't explain. Didn't defend myself. Because there are moments in life where silence isn't weakness. It's timing. What Mark didn't know, what he couldn't see, was that the desk came with something far more valuable than walls. Access. The co-working space was housed in an old mixed-use building downtown. 3 floors. Retail on the ground level. Offices above. Owned by a holding company Mark's firm had dismissed years ago as low potential. I knew that because I'd read the filings. Every single one. I knew the lease expirations. The tax delinquencies. The quiet disputes between partners. I knew the building was bleeding, slowly enough that no one was panicking yet. And I knew something else too. The owner sat 2 desks away from me every morning, drinking burnt coffee and pretending he wasn't worried. He thought I was just another woman with a laptop. Another nobody renting time. He didn't know I was listening. Every day, Mark drove past that building without a second glance. If he'd looked up, really looked, he might have noticed the cracks in the facade. The way the signage hadn't been updated in years. The tenants cycling through faster than they should. But Mark only noticed things that impressed him. And a woman renting a desk? That didn't qualify. I let him believe that. Because 5 years is a long time to underestimate someone. And the desk? The desk was just the first step. What I didn't realize then, sitting there, fingers hovering over my keyboard, was how personal this would become. Not just about success. Not just about money. But about watching the person who laughed at you walk straight into a future you quietly built around them. And at that desk, with the scratch and the wobble, I made a decision I never said out loud. One day, Mark would stand in that building and not understand how it happened. And I would. The first thing I learned at that desk was how much people reveal when they think no one important is listening. They talked while standing in line for coffee. They talked while pacing near the windows. They talked because silence made them nervous. And I sat there, quiet, typing, nodding politely when someone glanced my way, the perfect background character. The kind you forget exists. At first, they barely noticed me. I was the woman at desk 47. Always early. Always alone. Never trying too hard to be interesting. That was intentional. People open up fastest around someone who doesn't compete with them. 2 weeks in, I knew which startups were about to fold before they announced layoffs. I knew which freelancers hadn't been paid in months but were pretending everything was fine. I knew which partnerships were fake smiles stitched over quiet resentment. And slowly, almost accidentally, I learned about the building. It came out in fragments. A sigh here. A muttered complaint there. The roof's going to need work soon, one man said into his phone, rubbing his temples. The bank's getting impatient, another whispered, like the walls could hear. We can't keep filling vacancies this fast, someone else snapped, frustration leaking through professionalism. They never said it all at once. But I didn't need them to. I pieced it together like a puzzle, one overheard sentence at a time. What I didn't realize then was how much patience this would require, and how badly it would be tested. Mark called me one afternoon while I was at my desk. I recognized the tone before he even said hello. Smug. Amused. Performative. Hey, he said. You busy playing office? I muted my mic, closed my eyes for a second, then answered calmly. I'm working. Right, he chuckled. Listen, I just toured a new building today. 12 floors. Glass elevators. Lobby that smells like money. I pictured him saying it in front of someone else, needing an audience. That's great, I said. You should come see it sometime, he added. Might inspire you to aim higher than, you know. He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. The desk. The joke. Me. I thanked him again. After I hung up, my hands shook. Just slightly. Not from anger. From clarity. Because Mark didn't understand something crucial. He thought success was about being seen. I was learning it was about positioning. By the 3rd month, the owner started talking to me. Not formally. Not directly. Just little comments. Long hours today, he said once, setting his coffee down too hard. Always, I replied, smiling without asking questions. He liked that I didn't pry. People always do. That's why they trusted me. His name was Richard. Late 50s. Expensive watch he checked too often. The kind of man who used to be confident and was now pretending nothing had changed. One morning, he asked what I did. I gave him the simplest version of the truth. Consulting, I said. Strategy. He nodded, relieved. Vague answers made him comfortable. What kind? He pressed. The kind where listening matters more than talking. That made him laugh, but it was the kind of laugh people make when they're unsure whether you're joking. From then on, he lingered. Complained about tenants. About partners who didn't pull their weight. about banks that didn't understand vision. I never agreed, never disagreed. I just listened. And every night, I went home and wrote everything down. At family dinners, Mark kept performing. He talked about deals closing, about numbers that made my mother's eyes widen, about how exhausting it was to carry so much responsibility. And you? My sister asked me once, like she was doing charity work. How's the desk? Mark laughed before I could answer. Still renting furniture by the hour, he said. I smiled, softer this time. It's working, I replied. He rolled his eyes. What I didn't realize then was how deeply he needed me to stay small. Because my silence made him uneasy. 6 months in, the co-working space announced a small rent increase. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to make people grumble. Richard looked pale that morning. Costs are going up everywhere, he muttered to no one in particular. I nodded, like it was none of my concern. But later that afternoon, he asked me something unexpected. You ever think about investing in real estate? He said casually, like he wasn't testing me. I met his eyes for the first time. Every day, I said. Something shifted in his expression. Curiosity. Caution. Hope. The dangerous kind. What kind of properties? He asked. I closed my laptop slowly. The kind people overlook, I replied. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he stared out the window at the street below, at the building across from us, newly renovated, already expensive. What I didn't realize then was that this question wasn't about me. It was about whether he was running out of options. That night, Mark texted me. You still at that place? I looked at the message for a long time before answering. Yes. A few seconds passed. Good, he replied. Someone's got to start somewhere. I set my phone down and stared at the ceiling. Because starting somewhere is harmless. But staying underestimated? That's power. And at desk 47, with my notes and my silence, I was beginning to understand just how fragile Mark's world really was. What I didn't know yet was how soon those two worlds, his and mine, would collide. And when they did, only one of us would recognize the building for what it truly was. The first time Richard told me the truth, it slipped out by accident. We were standing near the windows, late afternoon light stretching shadows across the floor. Most of the desks were empty. People had gone home to families, or bars, or distractions. Richard stayed. He always did. The bank called again, he said, staring at the glass like it might answer him. 3rd time this week. I didn't turn around. Sounds stressful, I said. He laughed, but it came out wrong. Hollow. Short. They want guarantees, he continued. Numbers I can't give them yet. Yet. That word did a lot of work for him. I closed my notebook quietly. The sound seemed louder than it should have been. What happens if you don't? I asked. He hesitated. That pause told me everything. They accelerate, he said finally. Force a sale. There it was. The crack. I nodded once, like this was ordinary conversation. Like I wasn't cataloging every syllable. That would be unfortunate, I said. Richard exhaled slowly, relief flooding his shoulders. He needed someone to hear it without reacting. What I didn't realize then was that he'd been waiting for this moment longer than I had. The next few weeks felt like walking across ice that could give way at any moment. Richard talked more. Not in big confessions. In careful leaks. About his partners, one retired, one sick, one angry. About maintenance deferred, temporarily, that had become permanent. About a tax reassessment coming at exactly the wrong time. He never asked me for advice. But he listened when I spoke. That kind of pressure changes how people negotiate, I said one afternoon, gently. Yeah, he asked. Yes, I replied. They stop looking for perfect solutions. They look for relief. He swallowed. That night, I ran the numbers again. Not just for the building. For myself. Mark found out about the building the same week Richard admitted the truth. Not from me. From arrogance. He called me after work, voice buzzing with excitement. "Guess what crossed my desk today," he said. "That dump you work in." I froze. "Excuse me?" I asked carefully. "The co-working place," he clarified. "Client asked if we'd consider brokering it." I laughed. Of course he did. "Why?" I asked. "Because it's a mess," he said. "Aging structure. High turnover. Owners in denial." Each word landed like a drumbeat. "He's holding out for a price he'll never get," Mark continued. "Honestly, he should have sold 2 years ago." I pictured Richard staring out the window. The way his hands shook when he thought no one noticed. "And?" I asked. "And nothing," Mark said. "Firm past. Not worth the effort." I thanked him and hung up. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. Because Mark hadn't just confirmed my instincts. He'd dismissed the building. Which meant no competition. That was the night I made the decision. Not emotional. Not impulsive. Strategic. I met Richard for coffee the next morning. Outside the building. Neutral ground. He looked tired. More tired than usual. "I might know someone interested," I said, stirring my cup. He looked up too fast. "In the building?" he asked. "Instability," I corrected. We locked eyes. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means," I said slowly, "someone who understands timing." He didn't smile. Neither did I. What I didn't realize then was how much this conversation would cost me, in ways money couldn't measure. I spent the next month assembling something invisible. LLCs. Quiet partners. Capital that didn't ask questions. I didn't tell my family. Didn't tell Mark. I kept showing up at desk 47, typing, listening, nodding, letting everyone believe nothing had changed. Meanwhile, Richard's situation deteriorated faster than he admitted. A tenant defaulted. A contractor threatened legal action. The bank shortened its timeline. He called me one night after 9 p.m. "I might need to move quickly," he said. "I know," I replied. That was the first time he sounded afraid. At Sunday dinner, Mark complained about work. "Market's shifting," he said. "People who waited too long are going to get burned." He looked directly at me when he said it. I met his gaze and took a sip of water. "Timing matters," I agreed. He smirked. "You'd know all about waiting," he said. I smiled back. What he didn't realize, what none of them did, was that waiting wasn't what I'd been doing. I'd been preparing. Richard called again 3 days later. "They're forcing my hand," he said. "I can't hold out." I closed my eyes. "Then don't," I said. There was silence on the line. "You're serious," he said. "Yes." "How soon can your contact move?" he asked. I glanced around my apartment. At the quiet, the order, the life I'd built without anyone noticing. "Immediately," I said. He exhaled. Relief. Fear. Gratitude. All tangled together. What I didn't realize then was that the hardest part wasn't securing the deal. It was what would happen when Mark finally realized who he'd been laughing at. And how deeply his own words would come back to haunt him. The first offer was supposed to scare him. That's what Richard told me later. Low enough to insult. Clean enough to tempt. Fast enough to feel like rescue. He forwarded it to me at 6:12 a.m. I read it once. Then again. Then I sat very still. Because the number wasn't wrong. It was desperate. We met in his office that afternoon. The one with the framed aerial photo of the building hanging slightly crooked on the wall. I'd walked past that photo for months without knowing it was there. Now it felt like a portrait of something already gone. "They're pressuring me to accept," Richard said, rubbing his face. "Saying it's the best I'll get." "And what do you think?" I asked. He hesitated. That if I wait, he said carefully, I lose leverage. I nodded. And if you rush, I replied, you lose control. He looked at me then, really looked. You're not just a consultant, are you? He said quietly. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The counteroffer went out that night. Higher than the first. Still lower than his pride. I helped him word it. Not aggressive. Not pleading. Professional. Calm. Final. The kind of message that said, I understand my position, and yours. The bank responded within hours. Mark would have been impressed. What I didn't realize then was how closely he'd soon be involved, without knowing it. 2 days later, Mark called. You busy? He asked. Yes, I said. Good, he replied. I need a favor. I leaned back in my chair. What kind? I asked. There's a building downtown, co-working space, actually, he said. Owner's panicking. Wants to move fast. My heart didn't race. That surprised me. Sounds familiar, I said. Mark laughed. Yeah, well, he came crawling back. Wants representation now. I closed my eyes. And? I asked. And I told him I'd take a look, Mark continued. But honestly, it's not worth my time unless I flip it quickly. Of course. What do you need from me? I asked. He hesitated, just for a second. I want your opinion, he said. You're in that space. You see the foot traffic. The vibe. I smiled. What do you want to know? I asked. Whether anyone would actually pay what he's asking, he said. I pictured Richard, exhausted. The bank emails. The looming deadlines. And Mark, confident, dismissive, certain he held the power. I chose my words carefully. Not at that price, I said. But if he adjusts expectations, he might get lucky. Mark scoffed. Thought so, he said. I'll push him down. He had no idea who he was pushing. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was afraid. Because I was aware. Every move mattered now. Every sentence could tilt the balance. Richard called me after Mark's meeting. He says the market's worse than I thought, Richard said, voice tight. That I should be grateful anyone's interested. And how did that make you feel? I asked. Cornered, he admitted. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. Good, I said. What? He asked. Cornered people make decisions, I replied. Controlled ones. There was a long pause. You're asking me to trust you, he said. I'm asking you to trust timing, I corrected. He exhaled. I don't have much choice, he said. No, I agreed. You don't. At Sunday dinner, Mark was glowing. Got a seller eating out of my hand, he announced. Classic mistake. Waited too long. My mother smiled proudly. You always were good with people, she said. Mark raised his glass. To knowing when to sell, he said. I raised mine too. To knowing when to buy, I replied. No one noticed the difference. What I didn't realize then was how close Mark was to discovering the truth, and how much it would cost him when he did. The final offer went out the next morning. Clean. Quiet. Decisive. Richard called me before responding. This ends it, he said. One way or another. Yes, I replied. Are you sure? He asked. I thought of the desk. The laughter. The years of being overlooked. I've never been more sure of anything, I said. He sent the acceptance. And just like that, the building changed hands. On paper, at least. What Mark didn't know, what he couldn't see, was that the buyer wasn't some faceless investor. It was me. And soon, he'd be standing in a building he thought was beneath him, wondering how he'd lost it without ever seeing me move. The first sign that something was wrong came in Mark's voice. Not anger. Not disbelief. Confusion. He called me on a Tuesday morning while I was standing in the lobby. My lobby, watching sunlight spill across floors that suddenly felt different under my feet. "Hey," he said slowly. "You know anything about the buyer on that co-working building?" I looked at the directory, the same one he'd walked past 100 times without reading. "Why do you ask?" I said. "Because the paperwork's strange," he replied. "Entities new. Clean. No noise." I smiled to myself. "That's not unusual," I said. "No," he admitted. "But what is unusual is how fast this closed." I said nothing. Silence has weight when you let it. The building felt quieter after the deal closed. Not empty. Expectant. Richard packed his things over the course of a week. We spoke less. When we did, his tone was lighter, like someone who'd been underwater and finally surfaced. "You saved me," he said once, not looking at me. "I gave you options," I replied. He nodded. "That's more than anyone else did." I watched him leave on Friday afternoon, carrying a box of framed photos and loose papers. The crooked aerial photo stayed on the wall. I kept it there on purpose. Mark started calling more often, asking questions that didn't quite sound like questions. "You ever hear of a firm called," he paused, reading, "Hawthorne Holding?" "No," I said truthfully. "What about the principals?" he pressed. "Not my area," I replied. He hummed, dissatisfied. "I don't like surprises," he muttered. That made me laugh, quietly to myself. At Sunday dinner, the shift was subtle. Mark wasn't performing. He was watching. "So," he said, glancing at me, "still at the desk?" I met his eyes. "Not exactly," I said. My mother looked up. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means," Mark said sharply, "she's being vague." I smiled. "Timing," I said. He frowned. The formal announcement went out the next morning. New ownership. Same tenants. Exciting changes ahead. I read it from desk 47, one last time. Then I stood, closed my laptop, and walked downstairs. The lobby smelled different already. Fresh paint. Clean lines. Possibility. The property manager met me near the elevators. "They're ready for you," she said. "For me," I repeated, just loud enough. Mark was standing near the front desk. He turned when he heard my voice. His face went through several expressions in quick succession. Recognition. Confusion. Dismissal. Then I stepped forward. Extended my hand. "Hi," I said. "I'm the owner." The silence was deafening. Mark laughed. Once. Sharp. Disbelieving. "That's not funny," he said. I didn't withdraw my hand. The property manager cleared her throat. "This is Ms. Hawthorne," she said. "She'll be overseeing the transition." Mark's eyes flicked to her, then back to me. "No," he said. That's not possible." I tilted my head. "Why not?" I asked. "You rent a desk," he said weakly. "I did," I agreed. His face flushed. "In this building?" he asked. "Yes." He looked around like the walls might contradict me. "They didn't tell me," he started. "They didn't need to," I said. The property manager excused herself. We stood there alone. Brother and sister. For the first time in our lives, the power dynamic had nowhere to hide. "You used me," he said finally. "I considered that." "No," I replied. "I listened to you." "That's the same thing," he snapped. "No," I said softly. "It isn't." He clenched his jaw. "You let me talk you down," he said. "I let you talk," I corrected. He opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time, Mark had nothing. "I can help you manage it," he said suddenly. "Leverage my firm. Make it profitable." I shook my head. "I already have a plan," I said. His voice dropped. You're making a mistake, he warned. I smiled. I've been making plans quietly for years, I said. That's the difference. He stared at me, really stared. Not as his little sister, but as something else. Something he hadn't accounted for. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, keys to the building heavy in my hand. I should have felt victorious. But what I felt instead was clarity. Because buying the building wasn't the end. It was the beginning. And Mark. He'd laughed at a desk. What he didn't realize was that laughter had funded every decision I made afterward. And soon, he'd understand what it feels like to be overlooked in a place you thought you owned. Mark didn't call for 3 weeks. That was how I knew the damage was real. Silence, for him, wasn't peace. It was injury. I felt it in the small ways first. His name stopped coming up at family dinners. My mother avoided mentioning work altogether. My sister texted me late one night, just one sentence. "What did you do?" I didn't reply. Because explaining would have cheapened it. The building changed faster than anyone expected. Not dramatically. Intentionally. I didn't replace everything at once. Didn't announce some grand rebrand. I fixed what mattered. The roof. The elevators. The lighting that made people look tired. I extended leases for tenants who paid on time. Let the problematic ones leave without a fight. Stability, I learned, is more seductive than spectacle. And the numbers followed. Quietly. Mark showed up unannounced on a Thursday afternoon. I was in what used to be Richard's office, the crooked aerial photo still on the wall, now straightened. He knocked once, then opened the door without waiting. Old habits. "You're freezing me out," he said. I didn't look up. "I've been busy," I replied. "With my building," he snapped. I met his eyes. "My building," I corrected. He flinched. That was new. "You embarrassed me," he said. I leaned back in my chair. "No," I said. "I surprised you." "That's not the same," he insisted. "It is," I replied, "when your identity depends on control." He stared at the floor. "People are talking," he said. "They're asking how I missed this." I nodded. "You did," I said. He looked up sharply. "You planned this," he accused. "Yes," I said. No apology. No hesitation. He laughed, but it sounded brittle. "You always were quiet," he said. "Guess I mistook that for harmless." I smiled. "That was your mistake," I said. The next week, his firm lost a major client. Not because of me. Because confidence doesn't survive being exposed. Mark started second-guessing himself. Deals slowed. People noticed. He called me that night. "I need help," he said. I closed my eyes. This was the moment. The one I'd imagined and dismissed 100 times. "What kind?" I asked. "Let me represent you," he said quickly. "Let me fix this." I thought of the desk. The laughter. The years of being invisible. "No," I said. The word landed heavy. "Why?" he demanded. "Because," I replied, "you don't respect what you don't understand." He was silent. At the next family gathering, the shift was undeniable. My mother asked me about renovations. My sister asked how I'd known. Mark sat quietly, nursing his drink. He didn't interrupt. Didn't perform. Didn't laugh. And for the first time, I saw him clearly. Not powerful. Just loud. Later that night, he pulled me aside. "You could have told me," he said. I met his gaze. "You could have listened," I replied. He swallowed. "I didn't think," he started. "I know," I said. That was the cruelest part. What I didn't realize then was how much this had changed me too. Power doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives with responsibility. And the quiet understanding that you no longer need permission. I walked through the building after everyone left, Lights dimmed, footsteps echoing. 5 years earlier, I'd sat at a desk and let myself be underestimated. Now, every door opened when I approached. Not because of who I was to someone else, but because of what I'd built. Mark texted me a week later. "I'm proud of you." I stared at the message, then deleted it. Because pride from someone who laughed at you once the risk was gone? That wasn't redemption. That was relief. And relief doesn't repair the damage arrogance leaves behind. I stood in the lobby one evening, watching tenants come and go. Confident. Calm. Unaware of the story beneath their feet. I thought of Mark. Of how easily he'd dismissed me. Of how certain he'd been. What I didn't realize then was that the final reckoning wouldn't come from confrontation. It would come from distance. From watching him adjust to a world where his voice no longer carried the weight it once did. And knowing that I would never again rent space, physical or emotional, from someone who thought so little of me. 5 years earlier, I had rented a desk. Just one. Wobbly leg. Scratched surface. A chair that never quite adjusted to my height. People laughed at that. They saw limitation. I saw entry. The grand opening wasn't grand. No ribbon. No speeches. No family invited for photos. Just fresh paint, full leases, and a quiet hum of people doing work that mattered to them. That's how I wanted it. I stood in the lobby early one morning, coffee in hand, watching sunlight move across the floor the way it had on the day Mark laughed. Only now, the floor belonged to me. Mark didn't come. He sent an email instead. Short. Professional. Careful. "Congratulations on the acquisition. Wishing you continued success. No jokes. No arrogance. No familiar ease." I read it once. Then archived it. Because closure doesn't always require a conversation. The desk was gone. I'd had it removed during renovations. But I kept the scratch. Framed it. Hung it in my office like a relic. Not as a reminder of humiliation, but of clarity. Of the moment I understood that beginnings don't need witnesses, only commitment. People started asking me how I did it. Tenants. Other owners. Women who sat across from me with the same tight smile I once wore. I never gave them a blueprint. Just the truth. "Listen longer than you speak," I told them. "Read what others skim. And never confuse silence with weakness." They nodded. Some understood. Some didn't. That wasn't my concern anymore. At the next family gathering, the dynamic had settled. Not healed. Settled. My mother bragged about the building to her friends. My sister asked about investing. Mark stayed polite. Distant. We were no longer in competition. Because competition requires agreement. And I'd stopped playing. One evening as I locked up, I caught my reflection in the glass doors. I looked different. Not richer. Not harder. Just steadier. I thought about that night, years ago, when Mark laughed and everyone else looked away. How small I'd felt. How invisible. And how none of them knew what I'd already done. The truth is, the building wasn't the victory. It was the proof. Proof that being underestimated can be an advantage, if you let it be. Proof that dignity doesn't need applause. Proof that revenge doesn't have to be loud to be complete. I didn't buy the building to teach my brother a lesson. I bought it because I saw what he didn't. Opportunity hidden beneath arrogance. Value buried under dismissal. And in doing so, I learned something more important than any deal. That the quiet woman at the desk? She was never small. She was strategic. Sometimes, when I walk past where desk 47 used to be, I pause. Just for a second. And I smile. Because I know something now that humiliation once tried to steal from me. That laughter fades. But ownership. Ownership echoes. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.